Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started now. Cheryl Bohling has been riding with NATRC for a number of years. She's been a longtime competitor, also been a farrier for many more years. She wrote a recent article in the Hoof Print about tips over the Anvil. This is a follow-on to that, and I'm going to let Cheryl talk from here. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for joining me tonight. Hopefully there's a big crowd out there. As Bill said, my name is Cheryl Bohling. I've been a farrier for 17 years now. I went to school down in Oklahoma at the Oklahoma Horseshoeing School, and then I moved back to Nebraska and started my own business. So 17 long, hot, hard years. I carry roughly about 100 customers on my list, and amongst them, they've got about 250 animals. So I do not anything, but horses, donkeys, ponies. I've done some alpacas. I've got a pot-bellied pig. I've done 2 of those over my time, and one's still on my list. His name is Piggy Smalls. There's some videos of us trimming him out there, and he likes to scream a lot. I've been a member of NATRC for 7 years. I found out about it at a horse expo that we had up here in Nebraska. And I met Sarah Smith and Sherry Paris, and I just thought, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard of doing this. So I got hooked immediately, and I'm happy to try and help people tonight with some farrier questions you might have. So during this time, I've volunteered more than I've competed. I was injured for a while, and so what better chance to learn than to go and volunteer and see everything, especially as a judge's secretary. I mean, you're right there in the thick of things. You hear all their comments, you get to see everything. So it's been excellent experience when I wasn't able to ride. So you see me as a secretary, you see me at P&Rs, and then I've been a manager a couple times at Indian Cave here in Nebraska, and I'll do just about anything that is needed at the rides. Been water girl, gopher, you name it. Not the big stuff, not like a rules interpreter or a trail master, but the other big parts. My greatest success, I would have to say, as a farrier has been shoeing for Sarah Smith when she rode for Tevis, and shoeing Tate. He belonged to Dwight and Mary Hansen, well, still does. And knowing that my work got them through 100 miles of Tevis, that was just the feather in my cap. We worked a long time. Sarah and I did. We had a plan. We knew what kind of shoes we wanted. We knew what terrain we were going to go over. We knew what obstacles we had to get over with Tate's feet, you know, what things we thought we needed to improve on there. And it all came together like clockwork there at the end, that final month of shoeing him. And we appreciate all that Dwight and Mary did in helping us both achieve those goals. Well, and with that, I didn't want to be the weakest part of that team. And our success showed that we were a great team. So this all started, I made some silly little post on Facebook about things that I've noticed at rides that would maybe help competitors and their horses get through rides with regard to shoeing. And I'd be standing there as a judge's secretary, or I'd be taking your pulse and respiration at a stop and look down, and occupational hazard, because all I do is look at horse feet. But then I'd see a popped clench, and of course tell you, the rider, that, well, your horse has stepped on his shoe. And so it kind of got into what can I do as a competitor and a farrier to help you foresee that you might have some of these issues. And so I wrote that little blurb on Facebook, and I sent it to my region, and then it got shared to a number of other regions. And then that sparked the interest of our newsletter team, the Hoof Print article then came after that. They asked me if I'd elaborate and write up a Hoof Print article. So I did, and that's what we came up with, tips over the anvil. That's not my word. I'm not sure who came up with that, but I think it's an awesome heading for it. And so hopefully a lot of you read it. If not, I'll cover most of this stuff in the presentation tonight, but it'll be a little bit different. And so then once I did that, then Fran calls me and she's like, hey, we need somebody to do a webinar. So I was quite reluctant at first, but it's kind of like the final thing now with seeing this through with Facebook and the Hoof Print and now our webinar. So again, thanks for joining me. So what I tried to do with my article also was not to put in a lot of opinion on, you know, this or that, shoes or barefoot or boots or anything, but just general information that would help for whatever you're doing at a ride. And so it's only my experience. I've only done shoes in Nebraska. I know that if I went to Colorado and did shoes, there would be a big learning curve for me. I'd have to learn what it takes to keep shoes on there. Same way if I went to Florida in that wet environment, I have to go ride around with somebody and figure it out. And even down to Texas, even though we're kind of both central, it's still just so hot and dry down there. It's a little different than what it is in Nebraska. So this is just my opinion, and I know there are many ways to go about accomplishing something. So all right, spare shoes. We'll start with spare shoes. The first thing, if you have spare shoes, is that you know where they are. Hopefully they're in your trailer. That would be the best place for you, and they would be of the most benefit for you there. But each of your shoes should be marked. So on these shoes here, these are Divas shoes. I'm guessing these are Heinz shoes. But if you look down in each of the outside corners, in the blue circle, I've both marked this. Generally, I just mark it with a magic marker because I throw them a lot of shoes in my truck if they're not too wore out, and I might need them for a spare on just the horses I do day to day. So I use a magic marker. I just put an X there. The X is for the lateral or the outside branch of the shoe. And then you can also do a different mark. You could use a number of different tools that will punch a little mark into the shoe. And so that's in both the blue and the yellow circles there. That's just a punch with a Pritt tool to indicate, again, the lateral outside branch. That's just standard practice for any farrier marking shoes. So in getting your spare set of shoes, it could be the last pair of shoes that you had for the year, and you're taking shoes off and going to go barefoot over the winter. In some regions, you're able to do that. You could save that, or it's just whatever the last pair of shoes was that you took off. If they're not too wore out, they'd be a good one to keep. They're already shaped to your horse's foot dimensions. Even if they're really wore out, there's still a better solution, in my opinion, than having a farrier you don't know at a ride. If you lost a shoe, didn't just spring it or you found it, but if you lost a shoe and just someone who doesn't know anything about your horse, doesn't have the same shoes that you are wearing, it would be easier to have even a completely wore out shoe put back on your horse than run the risk of someone hurting your horse by maybe not shaping it quite right or trying to do something a little bit more than what was necessary to keep a new shoe on your horse's foot. The other option then is to have your farrier, when they're making up a new set for your horse, is to make up 2 sets. And then you'd have a brand new set of shoes in your trailer in the event that you were to pull a shoe. Now I can give advice, but I don't always take my advice on setting up my clients with spare shoes that I know are not just doing NATRC, but they're going on trail rides. I've got a number of people who like to go to the Black Hills, which that's some rough country up there. And so finally I made sure this girl, she was going, and I made sure this summer that her 2 horses had extra shoes. And thank goodness that I did, because they were riding in some really rough waters, doing a lot of crossings through this creek. You couldn't see the rocks in there, and she wound up pulling a hind shoe on one of her horses. And I don't know that, of course, it was the horse that I thought, oh, this horse never pulls hind shoes. And but he did have fronts. And so they were the same type of shoe. And there was, just by the greatest chance, there was a farrier there that had come to help someone else who lost a shoe. And he was able to make that shoe work for her. And it was a lot easier for her. So just the confidence it gave her, knowing that they were there, was a huge help and success that, hey, we did what I said, and it actually worked. When you've got a spare shoe and you've lost it, and if it's shaped to fit your foot and it's the same type of shoe, then those nail holes that are in the foot, they're like pierced ear holes. After a week or two, you can just pretty much drop a nail through the shoe into that hole, and it might go in there a quarter, half of the way. And so there's no real danger then of nailing wrong. Now, if you've ripped off a big part of foot, something different, but otherwise it wouldn't be too scary for someone who doesn't really know what they're doing to go ahead and tap that nail in and then bend it over and clinch it. One thing I found in dealing with lost shoes, and I don't know if you've got a farrier that says they never lose shoes, I'd have to question that, but all horses lose shoes. It's just a matter of them being horses. A lot of times they're not going to do it while you're riding them. They're doing it when they're in their stall and they've laid down, they're going to get up at night, or they're out jacking around in the pasture, and legs and feet are going places they're not normally going. And a lot of times they'll step up, overreach, and pull a shoe or spring a shoe. But one thing I've noticed over the years is internet connection's unstable, is that a thicker shanked nail is going to give you better retention of those shoes. So in general, when I shoe, I use a 5 slim blade. It leaves the least amount of damage in a foot. It's easy to drive. It's kind of just a nice go-to. But then once it gets to be summer, and I know with the fly stomping and the increased activity here, then I'll tend to switch to what's called a regular head. The slim blade has a city head is the definition, and the other is a regular head. So it's got a different head to the nail. I apologize, I didn't take any pictures of nails, but then the shank on it is also thicker, and it holds up more to the concussion of the fly stomping, or just the extra use, being that you're out on the trail or just being rode more. And then if you were to, in general, I only use 6 nails in a foot. I've got 3 on each side. I'll go down to even 2. I've got a couple dressage horses that either they've got smaller feet or they've got real thin walls. And even though they may grow enough foot, they don't grow really. I want to kind of move my nails around. If I always use all 6 nails or all 8 nail holes, then I really don't have very many options for moving nails around if I needed to find some new hoof to go into. But that being said, I sent the same girl that had lost the shoe up in the Black Hills. We wanted to make sure she wasn't going to lose shoes on her Morgan. And he's got a big, beautiful, thick-walled hoof. And we did 8 nails in them. And I know that's standard practice for some farriers. And again, if I was there, maybe I'd always put 8 nails in. But in general, you don't want to put nails behind the widest part of the foot. And if you look where the 3rd nail hole down is on these shoes, that is the widest part of the foot. These are shaped a little, you'd see the lateral branch on each of these goes out a little bit further. That's more for support. But if you're putting that 4th nail in, the one closest to the heel, it limits your heel expansion. And depending on your horse, everything's always dependent on each individual horse, but it will limit the expansion of the heels because it's locking that shoe in place. So it's locking the foot together. And if you've got a horse that tends to have some heel problems, that would be something I would try not doing for him because they need that heel expansion. Same thing with clips. If you were to use clips, they will help stabilize that shoe on the foot. But I've also had horses where, because it's limiting the expansion of the whole foot, they tended to get a little sore. Could get tap the clips in too much, but I mean, in general, the clip is designed to not allow for that expansion. And it's towards more the front of the foot at that point. So again, for that horse, I went with 8 nails and it served us well. But then the next time I took the 8 nails out, just went with 6 again to allow his foot to act as natural as it could with a shoe on. Popped clinches. So this is what I see when I'm a secretary or a P&R worker and look down. What I'm seeing is each of these 3 pictures. If you look at the one on the right, that's the easiest one to see. So a horse is stepped on that heel of the shoe, and as the shoe gets bent down, then it pops the clinch up, and you can see it. Aside from it just sticking out, if you look at the top photo, it's even a little bit shiny. And if you see the other 2 nails on that foot, they're still covered in poo. So it's been getting brushed by something to keep it shiny, and then that can catch your eye, as well as just seeing that it's sticking out a little bit more. The photo at the bottom is a little bit harder to see, but if you look close, it still is at a slightly different angle than the front 2. And the horses just barely caught that shoe and sprung the heel. I don't have any pictures of a sprung shoe on a foot. It can be very difficult. I mean, I've seen where that sucker's bent down a good inch, and that horse is not going to go anywhere else until you pull that shoe off. And it's amazing the shoe is still on if it's bent down that far. But in general, they can do all these sprung heels, and you really can't tell until you take it off and put it on a flat surface and then see how far the heel is sprung. I'll have a picture of that in just a minute. So what you could do to not to prevent it, but to see it is, speaking of in a competition, that when you go, before you check in with your judges, you pick out your feet and you would slide your hand around your feet and just make sure that the foot feels all smooth and tight and there's nothing catching at your hand or your glove that would indicate the popped clinch. If you feel that, then there's a whole different thing of, well, what are we going to do about this? Hopefully there's a farrier there, or a farrier can be called. You may be able to check in and your horse is fine, but it may be enough that your horse is sensitive to it and could present as being lame. And I would assume, if there's a judge around, that if we identify what the problem is and can get it fixed before everything gets started, you could get rechecked, and then things would be okay for you to start. But in general, I would pull the shoe, flatten it out, and re-nail it, because over the course of however many miles you're going to do in that weekend, whether it's 10 or 20 or up to the 60-mile open, your horse could become sore over that. I've got a little lesson mare who's full of opinion, and if she just, I don't know how, for one, she could ever step that far ahead and pop her clinch, but she will, the barest little thing, and she just thinks she's going to be dying. So anytime we know she's like that, well, she's stepped on a heel. Other horses, you just never even know. They're just stoic and they deal with whatever we don't notice on them. But you wouldn't want to just tap this thing down. Now, if it was an emergency, you could take a little hammer and you could gently tap it down, or you could take some clinches. But I mean, just know that your shoe is probably bent and you would want to remove it, flatten it, nail it back on. This is a picture of a shoe. This is kind of nice because I got both sides of the foot. And so you can see on the left of your screen where the clinches, even though, you know, this is a shoe that's due to be reset. Usually most of these pictures are from a hunter jumper barn I do. And they don't do a lot of competing. That's what they do and lesson. And so he's a little overgrown, but the clinches on the left side are nice and tight yet. They're raised above the surface of the foot, but they're all at the same downward angle. And then you can see where this one has really stomped on this shoe and has popped all three of the clinches. And that one, it's surprising that they'll get it where they can lose a nail. And so, you know, if you've lost a nail or you pick up your foot and you've got half a nail and it's bent over on the bottom side of the shoe, that there's a definite issue with that foot. So that's just a big stop sign right there for you. So here's the sprung heel. And this is probably from one of those pictures because that's the only place I take pictures. So, but you can see it laying on the anvil where it's flat all around until it gets to this heel on the right side. And then it's been raised, good 1/8 of an inch or so with what it stomped on. So again, you just flatten it, nail it back on.
I'm going to interrupt real quickly.
Go ahead.
For those of you online, if you have any questions, there should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom meeting. Go ahead and click on that and type in any questions you may have, and we'll get them answered for you. Sorry for interrupting. You're good now.
Oh, thank you, Bill. All right, so all the ugly looking feet. Well, now I've got a couple pretty feet here for you. So these are the way I clinch. Every farrier has got a different technique in general for the way that they do clinches. Some are pretty, some are not as pretty. I've seen some pretty ugly stuff, but you know what? The shoes stay on and that's all that matters. So these are done, I like smooth clinches. But you can see in the previous slides how those do get raised up over the course of the shoeing cycle. Yeah, there's nothing. They're just, I don't know. I don't know what I was going to say about this. Just they're smooth. And the thing is to know how your horses normally look once they've been shod, how your farrier's clinches normally look. That way, because if you looked at maybe the way your farrier does them, and then what I'm showing for some of my more older clinches, further along the shoeing cycle, they may look similar, but you know, your farriers, they may just be brand new. Just know how your horse's feet look every time as after they've been shod. Take a picture of them if nothing else, so you can know, is this what they're supposed to look like? Here's another. This is just she's a nice big warm blood mare, used to jump internationally, and she's just a brood mare now, but she's got some pretty nice looking feet. And usually all my pictures are of horses that have something wrong with their feet. So it was nice to take a picture of just a nice job. I was proud of it. So that's all that one is. Let's see. Okay. This isn't to spark any kind of big thing. It's just showing angles. I've got a front foot and a hind foot. The hind foot's saddlebred. And in general, when you're looking at the angles of a foot, you want to try and have the leg as vertical as you can. So great conformation, point of the rump, and then it hits the hock, and then down to the back of the pastern. If you dropped a line, it should be straight, excuse me, which would also be vertical. And then the angle of the foot. So, excuse me. Black line just shows it's not on the hoof, but right along the hoof wall. And then the blue line. So if you were picturing a foot in there, and this isn't quite to the, it's a little bit more to the front of the foot than you'd want if you were doing a straight lateral shot. But generally it will bisect the pastern and then go up through the fetlock. It should be on the same angle. This is a good fit. This would not be what the majority probably of my feet look like. Every horse is different. This horse, well, these two horses, great angles, but every foot is always a work in progress, and you're always doing your best to deal with the feed changes, the seasonal changes. It's a constant work in process for your farrier, or if you do your own feet, you know that it's like, these feet didn't look like this last time, and now you're having to deal with maybe a little angle that you weren't expecting. The foot on the right's a thoroughbred. This horse had just come through a huge rehab on this foot, had a big white line disease bubble. I had resected it clear to the hairline. So this was its final day, and he moved to Minnesota after this. The final day I trimmed him, and it was grown out. He had actually grown out that foot in 7 months. So hope he's doing well. But he wound up having a great angle with all that care, and matches him pretty good. He's standing a little with that foot a little behind center. Any questions so far?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet. I did have a question myself, and you were talking about the extra shoes.
Okay.
From a consumer point of view, having my farrier make an extra set of shoes each time sounds a little expensive.
Exactly.
If assuming that I've been using you for a little while and the horse's feet aren't changing a whole lot, is that the kind of thing where you can shoe this time, make an extra set, use the extra set with a little work next time, and kind of rotate through an extra set of shoes? Or should I do that really when I've got a big event coming up and flip for the extra expense, because I know I've got a big event or some big events coming up, and for the extra set of shoes?
I would just use your last pair of shoes that you'd made.
Okay.
Then there's no extra expense.
Gotcha.
It should fit, even if it's last year's shoes. I mean, your horse's feet really in general don't change that much. And even if they did, say they get expanded a little bit, that's still something that's easy for a farrier to open that shoe up a little bit. You know, the key for me is that your shoes match. They're matching what the nail hole placement is versus a totally different shoe. You'd have different nail holes that you can't always find new foot to put in, and then you're dealing with someone who doesn't know your horse trying to get that shoe on. So even if it's, like I said, an old wore out shoe, that's still the same type of shoe as what you use. It's going to be better in the long run, I think, than taking your chances.
Better than some random shoe that they happen to be carrying.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So now I just have a couple pictures of some pads. This is called, it's Vettex product. It's the Equipack CS. And this is a soft pad. It's not the softest pad they have, but I put this in just because this isn't a good trail pad. It's too soft. the trails will just eat this thing up and it's kind of money wasted. You can put this under another pad if you had a leather pad on or a plastic pad on and you wanted to do a total, you didn't want anything to get in there, or you wanted to add more sole support that the flat pad isn't having, then you could squirt this in and it would be soft enough to use. But in general, using it like what I've used here, it's just, I tried it before and it just winds up crumbling and falling out, even with the mesh in there. And you can't, these both have mesh on them because that's what I do. I think in the next picture, you can see the mesh a little better. So if you look at the picture with the 4-leaf clover on it, there's at the heel, you can see where the mesh is. And I use that on any foot I do because it's too expensive of a process to not try to ensure that that thing is going to stay on, that pad will stay in there as long as I can. They will adhere to the sole, but then depending on what your environment is, it may he went through Tevis with these are 100 miles. So the first shoe on the left is it's probably a left front, and the top shoe on the right should be that same foot. So that's what that pad looked like after 100 miles of Tevis. And then we've got a hind foot. I think this is a left hind foot of his also. So you can see they held up very, very well through the water crossings, through all the rocks, through all that hard terrain. And he was successful. You can also see how much that shoe, this is a St. Croix Eventer front, how much that shoe wore down in that 100 miles. I only used 6 nails on there. I know when we'd first posted these, people were asking about, 6 nails versus 8 nails, but we had tried and tested this, what we wanted to do, and 6 nails held, and we believed in what we'd done, the work we'd done. Same thing on the hinds. There were no clips on these. It was just the pad and the nails holding these shoes on. We opted to go with, this is the Equa build. I think we also used some Sole Guard at one point, which is again a tougher product than the blue product. And we started practicing on the front feet with this, and then we went cheaper on his hinds until it mattered. We just had leather pads on the hinds. But my thoughts were, in going into Tevis, I wanted to have the best contact with the foot that I could with the shoes, and knowing that we wanted to have pads. And so the only thing between that shoe and the foot is that little thin, I don't know, 1/16 of an inch of mesh. And then the pad goes through it all and adheres to the foot. And then once we got, I don't remember what it was, if we were the shoeing cycle out from Tevis, gave him 2 times with the hinds in the same pad to get used to it. The cool thing that Sarah had said when we first put these pads on was Tate realized he didn't have to worry about his feet anymore. And it was something that we didn't really know that he was worried about. But you think of your horse and going through all the rocks and everything that we see on our trails, and they do have to be concerned about their feet. But all it did so it gave him confidence in walking. He didn't worry about his feet anymore. But then he found all sorts of other things to be spooky about. So it was funny how it changed, having pads on changed his attitude. So I didn't do any other pictures of anything, but you've got leather pads, you've got flat plastic pads. You may need a wedged plastic pad, and then you'd want to put something to kind of help fill the gap in on those. You can use pine tar is usually the biggest thing. Pine tar, there's a bunch of different products like that. Essentially what it does is helps keep your foot moist and not let anything get underneath that pad. If your horse needed a lot more support, then you could do like I talked with the Equa Pack or the Equa, there's a soft one as well that you can inject in under there. I would not be afraid to put pads on your horse, whether they're leather or anything else. Leather's, of course, the most economical. It'll last twice. You could reset it once. But any more than that, then the leather starts to degrade and you really want to switch it out. And they don't cost much. They're, cost wise, they're, I don't know, $6-7 for a pair of leather. And then whatever the labor is for your farrier to do it. Helen Smith, she's in our region too. And she spoke about, they went to a ride, I think in Arkansas, and she didn't have pads on. It was very, very rocky. And a time or two after that, when they were shoeing, they found all of the bruising that had happened to Jesse's soles. And it would just break your heart to see that, to know that you'd asked him to do these fun rides. And then in the end, either he I don't think he got lame from it, but to know that he was truly that hurt because he didn't have pads on. So know your environment and where you're going. And if you really need to have pads, you can have them on one time too, and then take them off. But that part's not going to affect their feet at all.
I had a quick question on pads.
Yes.
I've never used pads. I've always thought the idea of putting a piece of leather between steel and the shoe is just going to add play, which is going to make the shoe become loose sooner. That's fairly accurate. So if I'm going to put in leather, that's probably means I'm going to need to see the farrier sooner, or I'm going to need to know how to kind of clinch things tight up again, or what extra care do using pads require, like leather pads require?
I really don't notice that I've got any difference in my shoeing cycles when I put leather on. It may be something you've got an extra nail in there. A lot of times they might have clips on already that's also helping restrict the movement of the shoe on the foot. We just chose not to do it for Tevis because, one day event, we wanted him as secure as we can, but I don't, my general shoeing, I don't think that they really affect a shoe getting lost any quicker than not.
Okay.
And same thing with if it's just a thin plastic pad. There's really no difference for me.
Yeah, I haven't used them, and it's just it's just something I was wondering if they made any difference. So it doesn't sounds like it helps the horse, but doesn't really change my planning cycle. Okay.
And there's different thicknesses you can get too. I mean, it may just be they just need just a little eighth of an inch to give them enough cushion that the rocks aren't hurting them, but that's not much.
Okay.
Not in your day-to-day shoeing. Was there another question there?
Yeah, we have a question from Christian. Is there any concern about the increased risk of thrush, etc., with pads?
Usually no. And that's what helps a lot with putting the pine tar in there under a leather pad, or if you do leather pads, usually you've got the pine tar product. If you're doing a plastic pad, like a Natural Balance pad, Castle's got pads that have a little fake frog kind of thing. Under those pads, then I would put dental impression material, which again, there's nothing securing it to the foot, but I'll put copper sulfate in there. Copper sulfate granules, a little, just like with the blue pad that I showed earlier. It's just loose copper sulfate that I'll sprinkle in there. And then I'll pack my pine tar in or the dental impression material. And I honestly don't see a lot of that, but that could be in the environment that I'm in as well. If you're in a real wet climate, it may be a concern for you. But generally where it's dry and people are maintaining their lots, even in the springtime here, when it's wet, I still don't see thrush. Thrush seems to be more of a horse to horse issue than environment. Because I've got horses that live in just filthy conditions and they never get thrush. So, but then I'll have a horse in an immaculate barn that gets picked out 2 times a day and they might wind up getting thrush. So I think it's almost more, is your horse prone to thrush, or is it environment? And you'd have to know. But there are ways to keep thrush from building up under that pad, and that's using copper sulfate.
An additional question, and I've kind of thought this too. I've used boots. Christian asks again, and for those of us using hoof boots, is the bottom surface of a Renegade equivalent to a pad?
Oh gosh, yeah. That's way thicker than a pad. A pad is so like a leather pad's only 1/8 of an inch thick. These the picture up now with the pour-in pads, those are still going to be really only 1/4 inch thick at the most. Now, as it goes into the commissures along the frog, it's thicker there, of course. But in general, this really isn't a very thick pad either. It's I'd say maybe up to 1/4 inch, because the hind shoe, if you look at it, it's a little bit more flush with the surface of the shoe. But on the front, on the eventer, it's really not much more than what the inside edge of the shoe is, which really it's about 1/8 of an inch too. So Renegade gives you a super protection. And inside your Renegades, I didn't put that up, but at the Reno convention, there was the vet tech table there, and I talked with them, and so they were showing where you could take their softest product, and I think they were probably using more of an easy boot, but inject that between the sole of your foot and the easy boot to help keep out any kind of pebbles or rocks that might go in it on your ride. It'd be more of a kind of temporary thing because you're not going to leave your boot on all the time, but I found it interesting to use that product in that way of helping keep things out of your boot. And keeping the boot probably from moving around too, because it would adhere to it a little bit. Another question?
I think we're caught up on questions.
Are we caught up? Okay. So winter shoeing, and of course this probably doesn't apply to half the country, but it is a question that I've had, and people, as they get to know me at rides, have messaged me and asked me questions and stuff like that. So again, I only have my experience here in Nebraska. The shoe on the left is one of my shoes. This is for a girl that fox hunts. It's not by any means the most kind of traction you can put on a horse, but what you're seeing here, again, it's an eventer shoe. It's got a snow rim pad, which that little looks like a rubber tube that's on the inside of the shoe. It's held on with the nails, and there's a flat, it's just kind of round with a little flat edge that you nail through, and then that keeps it on. It creates enough movement that the snow won't adhere to the shoe, which if you're in snowy country, you'll see that they'll have a big old snowball of snow that they've just packed in, and they can do that in a matter of minutes, packed in under that shoe. And I don't know that I've ever heard of a horse being hurt because it had a snowball under its foot, but it's a huge concern to owners that they'll be out there chipping those things out all the time, and even on a barefoot foot, they're going to pack up with snow, and then they just fall out over time. But if you're riding, then that's something that you wouldn't want, and so you could put on this little pad. There's also a different one. It's called a popper pad. It's got a whole sole coverage with a little ball in the middle that, as the horse steps down, that ball raises and lowers and keeps the snow from building up too. And then these are drive-in studs that are at the heel. So I drilled a hole, and then or they're tap-in studs. You can get all different degrees of aggressiveness to them. You can also add them up kind of where the front nail hole is on the shoe, so that you've got extra grip. This is sufficient for her, for what she does. You really want to be careful that you're not doing a lot of quick, tight turns with those, and wrenching your feet as they dig into the ground and then make a quick, sharp turn. So no barrel racers with these suckers on. Then the boot on the right, this is just a photo I saw on Facebook that I thought was interesting. And I don't know if these are just tap-in studs or screw in. So you've got either or that you can use. The screw in can be removed, which a lot of you could, if you were doing eventing, then you'd do a bunch of different lengths, and you could change those out between whatever course you're running. Whereas the drive-in studs are just kind of easier and they're in all the time. So this Renegade boot's been equipped to give them a little bit of traction, not too much. You can see it's not near as aggressive as the shoe on the left, but still just something so that I would assume on ice, this boot isn't sliding. Pull-offs. This is a big, at a ride earlier this year, I didn't have my little kit set up in my RV and I wasn't riding, and boy, if we could only had a pair of pull-offs at that ride to take a shoe off. Everybody had a pair of clinchers, but nobody had a pair of pull-offs. So now my kit's set up and we're ready. So what you're looking at here, the top picture on the left, the tool on the left is actually a pair of nippers, and the tool on the right is a pair of pull-offs. So the nippers are meant to cut and only cut, not to, you'd have to be really careful to not, because you don't want to damage your nippers, but you can just see the head's a little different on them. The pull-offs, you can still cut with them. You wouldn't want to try and trim a foot with them, but you can knit nails with them. That's what a lot of people use them for too. There's the bottom picture. It is a really old, ugly pair, but just to show you that it really doesn't matter, what kind of shape they're in, but you need a tool to be able to pop that shoe off. And I know people have used their fencers too. So the picture on the right is a picture of fencers with a little leather cover over it to keep them protected. But it's kind of whatever you could have at hand. I'd seen a question and what could you carry with you in the event that your horse stepped on a shoe enough that it needed to come off, just to prevent any more damage to the horse or to the hoof. And so I looked up and there was a pair of pull-offs that were just 12 inches. So, if you could have, I don't know, it's just extra weight. I don't know that if you were in some backcountry trail riding, it'd be one thing. At a ride, we could probably get somebody around enough with a pair to save you, but it would be kind of heavy to carry along on the trail, but certainly something to always have in your trailer. It seemed like I was something else with those. And there are different styles too. There's another pair that's got some grip, like some little teeth on the sides, and you can use those to actually open up and spread your shoes too, if you were doing some modifications there. I'd said in my article, ask your farrier if they've got some old nippers. So once the nippers, like I've got a couple pair that are, I chipped out the edge, and so no longer fit to trim a foot, but they'd certainly be good enough to throw in a trailer and use as pull-off. So if you're wondering, ask your farrier if they've got anything they want to lighten up in their truck. Tools to save the day. So if I was to put together a little kit as just someone who was always trail riding and had shoes, these are the things that I would look to invest and keep in my trailer. So on the left, pull-offs. Pull-offs also are designated. If you look down at the bottom of the tool, you can see it's got two different ends. It's got a flat rounded end, and then it's got the little kind of turn to the right side end. So a pull-off in the farrier world has either balls on the end, like little rolled ends, or they're just not the same. So that designates a pull-off too, in case you can't tell the difference between the heads on them. And then this is a driving hammer. It can be kind of cheap. they don't, for what you're doing, you're not doing it every day like I am. So, but a nice little driving hammer, something to maybe ring off the nails with the claw part of it would help. But just a hammer, could be a little picture framing hammer or picture hanging hammer too. Just something to knock that nail in. If you had to, you would use your pull-offs. And I've done that too. Use those to, I wouldn't want to hammer in a nail, but I could reset a nail into a hole that was already there with my pull-offs. Then a rasp, try to keep it in a cardboard sleeve if you can, just because it doesn't have to be the sharpest rasp, but just one that's maybe not full of rust. And in general, your trailer is probably going to have a little moisture in it sometimes. So even you can get a leather sleeve that goes over them too to keep it nice and fresh. Then you've got a pair of clinchers. There's a couple of different styles of those too. They're the bent part of the clincher, which is what fits to the top, the outer hoof wall of the hoof. You'll see different angles on some of them, but generally they all do the same thing, and they will clinch a nail. A nice hoof knife. Doesn't have to be anything special. I lost my knife at a place yesterday, and I wound up having to use, this guy whipped out some really ugly, I've never used that kind of knife before, but it was sharp and it did the trick. And I figured out after a couple minutes how to use it well. Didn't cut myself. Then you've got a hoof pick, whatever kind you like. This is my choice for the last few years, is this Noble Outfitter one. And then a little box of nails. So it doesn't have to be a lot of nails, just, dozen, 20 some. You'd think if you had to replace a couple of shoes, you'd want at least a dozen. And then just stick those in a little bag or wrap them up in something, and you're ready for the trail with your shoes. Okay. Planning for success. This is a shot of July of my schedule, and there's nothing really special about it, just that these horses, most of the horses on my schedule, and especially if they're trail horses, we start when we put shoes on, because we don't wear shoes around here unless they're fox hunting or riding in a barn a lot here. When we put shoes on in the spring, then my question is, what do you have planned for the summer and into the fall, but mostly over the summer, because that's going to be the next 3-4 months. And then we will try to figure out where they're going, what their plan is, and then when we should have their shoeing intervals. We don't try to necessarily go by a schedule, but or a 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks. It's what do we need to do to make sure when you go to your ride that your horse is ready for it and the least chance of losing a shoe. So there's a lot of information on this page, but that's what we're trying to get at is to be prepared. Don't get surprised that, oh, I'm going to a ride and look, my horse needs shoes and now I need to rush and try and get a farrier. You should have that all planned out.
What's your opinion on my horses? We wintered with no shoes on, and then we start riding and competing, and that's March or April. As soon as the snow goes away, what would be, from a horse that's going barefoot to shoed, what would be the least amount of time before an event that you would think would be wise to put shoes on? Usually
I want to do my horses a week before they go to an event.
Okay.
And I never like coming into spring, excuse me, I never like the first pair of shoes I put on. It's always because they've been sometimes just really chipped up. I'm dealing with a totally different foot than a foot that's been in shoes at least one cycle. So they're some people we do them fairly late, getting started for the ride, and then we think, okay, next year I want to do these one cycle earlier so that we know that we've got the best success for that horse in shoes. But at the minimum, I don't like to shoe step the week that they're going to go do something. I want to know that I've gotten it right, that they've had a chance to get out in them, and then have success at their ride.
Okay.
Does that answer that?
It does. It's kind of that was kind of my thought process too. I just couldn't looking for a professional point of view, so to speak.
Okay. And an average, there's no average shoeing time. I used to have a little dressage horse that I had to do him at 4 weeks. They could tell at 4 weeks that he needed his feet done. So we had to go that short with him. And he grew enough foot that we could do him in 4 weeks. And then I've got others that they're perfectly capable of going 8 weeks. And it's just dependent on your horse, dependent on where you're riding too, as to how long. So the best, I guess what I want to say too is this is a working relationship between you and your farrier. And if your farrier isn't on board with trying to get you on a schedule, then maybe you need to find a different farrier who wants to plan and be a part of your team for the success. I mean, you're investing a lot when you go to these rides, and I'm hugely invested in my trail riders and where they're going, and that I'm not a failure for them, that they lost a shoe. It just, I feel horrible anytime I hear that something happened to my shoes. So develop that relationship with your farrier. And if they're reluctant, and then again, maybe it's time to seek someone who wants to be a part of your team. So there was one other thing that came up. I saw it a month or so ago. They were talking about, is this ride barefoot friendly? And I'd just seen the comments, and of course, yes, it was barefoot friendly. But barefoot friendly is subjective to your horse as well. And so your ride managers could say that it's barefoot friendly, but you need to know your horse, and you need to know how your horse is conditioned to being rode barefoot, to think that they might be able to actually go to that ride and ride barefoot. I went down to Canopolis at the start of this year on a brand new horse. I didn't know how she was. She had great feet and everything. But over the course of that first day, the rocks were enough that by the end of the day, she was sore. And I didn't want to put her through one more day with that. So I wasn't prepared enough to know what her limitations were as far as being barefoot, or I hadn't ridden there for a while to really know just how much rock is on that trail. And so if you've got a horse that's used to it, it's totally different than one who's always been either rode in like a forest trails that are soft and spongy, or just sand even. It's different than going to rock where their foot's not conditioned to it. So I just wanted to make the point that you need to know your horse and what your horse is capable of for riding a barefoot trail. There are definitely barefoot trails out there. I mean, our Indian Cave ride here in Nebraska you'd have to, I don't know, where do you have to go to find a piece of rock there? There's not rock there, but that's probably pretty rare as far as other trails go. So are there any other questions?
I don't have any questions online. It's if you're at the end, are you still going, or how we're doing?
Nope, that's it for
We're
me.
there.
We're at an hour.
Let's give people a moment to ask any final questions, and then we will call it quits. This has been really informative. I read your article, but what you did here, you kind of filled in a lot of holes and did a lot more explanation, and I really appreciate it.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you so much for that.
I am not seeing, we have a thank you so much. I'm not seeing any more questions. Cheryl, thank you so much for doing this. I thought it was a great talk.
It was fun.
And for those of you still online, it's we had a little trouble with Google access, but I will get this posted here shortly. And thank you again so much, and have a good night all. We are going to have another talk next spring in September, fourth Wednesday of the month. Excuse me, I believe it's going to be with Purina, but we're still working out the details. I have a couple Q&As that were question and answers, which were, hang on.
They're just two thank yous.
They're just two thank yous. Okay. Anyway, we'll sign off. Thank you so much. And have a good night.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everyone.